Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at the Serbian Orthodox Church in Kosovo. A lot of folks probably know about, the political tensions in the region, but we're going to be looking at some stuff that goes way deeper than the headlines. So we're going to try to understand how, religion and national identity are, they're just completely intertwined for the Serbian Orthodox Church,
Yeah, absolutely.
To help us kind of unpack all of this, we're going to be looking at this really fascinating paper by Rudy Scholar. It's called Through Tribulation and Despair.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to read that one?
Yeah, I've read that paper. It's a really interesting look at how this particular religious community views the world, especially their idea of the land as sacred, which is something that's not really thought about a lot in Western culture so much.
Right, and that's a big question. I mean, that's one of the first things that jumped out at me when I was reading this paper. How can the international community how can they even try to work toward peace in Kosovo?
Yeah.
When, for a good chunk of the population there, the very concept of land is, spiritually charged.
Yeah, that's the central dilemma. And to understand that, we kind of have to start with the historical context,
Okay.
For centuries, the Serbian Orthodox Church, the SPC as it's often called, has been really closely tied to the Serbian state. And it played this central role in preserving Serbian culture and identity, especially during times of, conflict and upheaval.
The paper even uses this term. It calls it a coordinated diarchy.
Yeah.
It's to describe the relationship between the church and the state there.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you realize just how deeply religious belief is woven into the fabric of Serbian identity,
Yeah, for sure. Imagine growing up in a place where your nationality and your faith are basically seen as the same thing, as two sides of the same coin. That kind of intertwining, going back centuries, that has a huge impact on how people view the world, especially how they relate to the land that they consider sacred.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of sacred land for a minute. The paper mentions Kosovo and Metohija as holding immense religious significance for the Serbian Orthodox Church.
Right.
Can you kind of unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's often compared to Jerusalem, in terms of its spiritual importance for Serbian Orthodoxy. For centuries, Kosovo was the center, right? It was the center of Serbian Orthodoxy. It was home to countless monasteries, churches, pilgrimage sites, places where the faithful could connect with their history and with the divine.
The paper mentions this thing called debts to God connected to these shrines. What does that mean?
Oh, it's a really cool concept. Basically, it's this idea of spiritual obligation. So for Serbian Orthodox believers, visiting these sites, it's not just tourism or sightseeing. It's a sacred duty, It's paying homage to their ancestors, to their faith, to God. Imagine a pilgrimage route, centuries old, leading to a monastery nestled in the mountains. People would travel for days, sometimes weeks, to reach these sacred places, to offer prayers, to seek blessings.
It really makes you think about how differently various cultures view land, view place. It's not just geography, it's a living tapestry of history, faith, and identity.
For sure.
And all tied up together.
And this deep connection to the land, it's what makes the loss of Kosovo, especially painful for a lot of Serbian Orthodox believers. They see it not just as a political defeat, but as a spiritual wound, a severing from their sacred heritage.
Which brings us to another key concept in the paper, this idea of martyrdom, the idea of Serbia as a nation of martyrs, of people who've just endured centuries of suffering and oppression.
Right, and that concept of suffering, it's deeply embedded in the Serbian Orthodox worldview.
Yeah.
And it shapes how they understand their history, their relationship to God, and even their national identity, really.
Yeah, and the paper tells this really powerful story about Prince Lazar, who back in 1389, he faced this really fateful choice: secure an earthly victory or choose a heavenly kingdom through a glorious sacrifice.
Right, and he chose the latter. He opted for defeat and martyrdom rather than compromising his faith and his people. And this really cemented this idea that even in defeat, there can be a spiritual triumph, a victory, in the eyes of God.
It's a very different way of looking at things than what we often hear here in the West, right?
Yeah.
Where success and victory are usually measured in very material terms.
Yes, yeah.
How much money did you make? How many likes did you get? or whatever.
Right, exactly. And this idea of martyrdom, it doesn't end with Prince Lazar. I mean, the paper talks about more recent examples, the persecution of Serbs during World War II, the violence and displacement during the Yugoslav wars. You know, all of these experiences, they've reinforced this sense of Serbia as a suffering nation, a people chosen by God to endure hardship and persecution.
Right. It really makes you wonder how this deeply ingrained sense of suffering, how that impacts how they view the Kosovo conflict and how they view the relationship with the international community.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge factor, and it leads to a very fascinating and potentially controversial comparison that the paper kind of delves into a bit.
You mean the analogy between the Serbian situation and the Jewish experience
right.
of exile and persecution?
Yeah.
I got to admit, that one kind of caught me off guard a little bit when I was reading the paper.
Yeah, it's a bold comparison for sure. But the paper argues that some Serbian intellectuals and clergy, they've drawn these parallels between their own experience of losing Kosovo and the Jewish historical narrative, you know, of displacement and yearning for a return to a homeland.
So they see themselves as a people dispossessed, driven from their sacred land and yearning for a return.
Yeah, and this ties back to that concept of land as a divine covenant, you know, for both subs and for some Jews. Relinquishing land isn't just a political matter, it's seen as a betrayal of their sacred duty. It's like a breaking of the covenant with God.
Wow. I'm really starting to understand the depth of feeling behind this. It's not just about, territory or political control. It's about something way deeper, more fundamental to their identity and to their faith. But the paper also raises some concerns about how this, religious fervor, how it's being channeled. It mentions these terms, Cleronationalism and Ethnophyletism.
Right.
Can you kind of help us break those down a little bit?
Yeah, those are complex issues, so we should probably unpack them carefully. Cleronationalism, basically, it's when you have religious leaders taking on more of a nationalist, a political role. Think about a priest giving a sermon that's as much about national identity and territorial claims as it is about spiritual matters.
Oh, okay. So it's like a blurring of the lines between religious authority and political power.
Exactly. And then you have Ethnophyletism, which takes it even a step further. It's this idea that you elevate your own ethnic group above others, even within a religious context. And this can lead to a dangerous sense of exclusivity, where your religious beliefs become intertwined with this belief in the superiority of your own people.
Right. And the paper suggests that these tendencies, they're actually on the rise within the SPC, fueled by the historical trauma of losing Kosovo and the perceived indifference of the international community.
It's a really complex interplay of factors, but the author is clearly concerned about the potential for these trends to lead to, extremism and instability in the region.
So we're left with this really challenging question then, right? How can the international community support the legitimate religious needs of the Serbian Orthodox Church without kind of accidentally fueling these more extreme elements?
Yeah, that's the dilemma at the heart of all of this, and it's what makes this deep dive so important. We need to understand these complexities if we're going to have any hope of finding a path toward peace and reconciliation in Kosovo.
And that's where the author's own personal experience comes in, right? He wasn't just an academic studying this issue from afar. He was actually working on the ground in Kosovo with World Vision.
Exactly, and that experience gives us some really valuable insights into the challenges and maybe even some of the potential solutions.
Okay, this is where I think things get really interesting. So tell us about the author's work with World Vision and what he learned about the difficulties of engaging with the Serbian Orthodox Church in a post-conflict environment.
Well, he was involved in a bunch of different peacebuilding projects, but there's this one case study that really illustrates the challenges of dealing with all these cultural and religious differences. Yeah. It involved this monastery called the Sveti Vrach Monastery, which had been pretty much destroyed during the war.
Okay, so the goal was to rebuild it. That sounds like a pretty positive step, right? Like a symbol of of healing, of reconciliation.
Right, exactly. And what's interesting is that there was a lot of support for it at the local level. Community leaders, both Serbian and Albanian, they were all for it. They saw it as a way to move forward, to rebuild trust, to kind of mend those broken relationships.
But then, the author ran into this roadblock, right? He faced all this resistance, and not from the local people, but from international organizations like the UN, the OSCE, that kind of thing. That seems kind of backward, especially if everyone on the ground was in agreement.
It does, doesn't it? And this is where all those cultural blind spots that we were talking about earlier, this is where they come in. They also think that a lot of the international staff, many of whom came from very secularized Western backgrounds, they didn't get it. They didn't understand the deep spiritual significance of this monastery for the Serbian Orthodox community.
It's like they were just looking at it through a purely practical lens, right? What's the point of rebuilding this monastery if there aren't that many Serbs left living in the area? But that completely misses the point of, their whole spiritual practice.
Yeah. Exactly. And this is where the contrast between Western and Eastern monastic traditions, this is where it becomes really clear. In the West, we tend to associate monasticism with social work, community service, things like that. But in the Orthodox tradition, the focus is way more inward contemplative. It's about prayer. It's about meditation. It's about seeking this direct experience of the divine.
So rebuilding this monastery, it wasn't just about providing a place for some monks to live. It was about restoring this vital spiritual center, a place where they could actually practice their faith and connect with their heritage. It seems like the international community, even with all their good intentions, they were kind of accidentally imposing their own secular worldview on this situation where religion was totally central.
Yeah, and I think that really gets to the core of the challenge here. How do you engage with a community whose worldview is so different from your own? How do you bridge that cultural divide without forcing your own values and assumptions on them?
The author uses this term cultural engagement. It's about going beyond just tolerance, beyond just respecting other cultures from afar. It's about actively engaging with them, learning from them, challenging your own assumptions, and building real, genuine relationships.
Right.
It sounds like a pretty tall order, especially in a place like Kosovo, where there's just so much historical baggage and unresolved trauma.
It is a tall order, but the author really believes it's the only way to get to any kind of lasting peace. He thinks that ignoring religion, sidelining it, it's just a recipe for failure, especially in a place like Kosovo, where faith is so deeply intertwined with people's identity, with their sense of who they are.
Okay, so how do we put this idea of cultural engagement into practice then? What are some actual concrete steps that the international community can take to engage with the Serbian Orthodox Church in a way that's both respectful and effective?
That's where the author's recommendations get really interesting. He talks about the need for the strategic inclusion of religious considerations into any kind of peace-building effort. So it means going beyond those traditional diplomatic and political frameworks, and actually actively engaging with religious leaders and institutions.
So not just talking to politicians and diplomats,
right?
But actually reaching out to the clergy,
right? To
the people who hold that spiritual authority within the Serbian Orthodox Church.
Exactly. And it's not just about listening to their grievances. It's about really understanding their worldview, their beliefs, their hopes, their fears. It's about finding common ground, building trust, and working together to create a shared vision for the future.
But we also have to be mindful of those potentially dangerous trends within the church that we talked about earlier, right? Cleronationalism, Ethnophyletism. How do we support religious freedom without accidentally empowering those elements that could undermine peace and stability?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It's a delicate balancing act, and the author he admits there are no easy answers, but he does offer some specific recommendations. One of the most promising things he highlights is interfaith dialogue.
Oh, interesting. So bringing together leaders from different religious communities, Serbian Orthodox, Albanian Muslims, maybe even representatives from other faith groups, to talk about their beliefs, their shared values, their hopes for the future. That seems, that could be a really powerful way to break down barriers and build bridges.
That's the idea. It's about, moving away from this us versus them mentality to a recognition of our shared humanity. And it's not just about theological discussions. It can also involve practical collaborations on stuff like, poverty reduction, education, environmental protection. These are areas where people from different faiths, they often find common ground, and they can work together for the common good.
So it's about building trust through action, through working together on shared problems, and kind of demonstrating that cooperation and understanding are actually possible, even when you have these deep historical divisions.
Exactly. And the author also, he emphasizes education. He thinks the international community should support programs that promote religious literacy and understanding both among their own staff and within the wider population.
So teaching people about different religious traditions, about their history, their beliefs, their practices, helping them to see the world through these different lenses and to really appreciate the diversity of human experience. That seems crucial, especially if we want to avoid all those cultural misunderstandings that can lead to conflict and mistrust.
It's about giving people the tools to engage with each other in a more informed, a more respectful, and a more constructive way. And it's not just about, preventing conflict. It's about building a more inclusive and harmonious society where everyone feels valued and respected.
It sounds like the author is he's advocating for a really holistic approach to peace building, one that goes beyond just traditional diplomacy. And actually embraces the complexity of culture and religion. Exactly,
and I think that's a message that really resonates far beyond the specific situation in Kosovo, in a world that's more and more interconnected, where conflicts often have these deep cultural and religious roots. We need to find new ways to bridge those divides, to build understanding, and to create a more peaceful future.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the need for this cultural engagement, and some specific recommendations for the international community. But what about the role of those non-governmental organizations that we mentioned earlier? How can they contribute to this whole process of peace building and reconciliation?
The author thinks that NGOs, especially those with a faith-based background, they have a really crucial role to play. They often have a different kind of access and influence than governments or international organizations.
You mean they're able to work more at the grassroots level, building relationships with local communities and earning their trust?
Exactly. They can be, mediators, facilitators, bridge builders, helping to connect those big international players with the real lived experiences of the people on the ground. And because a lot of these NGOs, they're rooted in faith traditions themselves, they often have a much deeper understanding of the role that religion plays in people's lives, and they can engage with religious communities in a way that's more authentic, more meaningful.
It's they can actually speak the language, both literally and figuratively. They understand all the cultural nuances, the religious sensitivities, and they can navigate those complex landscapes in a way that outsiders often just can't.
Yeah, and the author gives some really compelling examples of how these NGOs have been effective in peace building around the world. You remember the community of Sant'Egidio? We mentioned them briefly earlier. They're a Catholic organization that's been involved in some pretty amazing peace building work in Mozambique and Kosovo and other places.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how these NGOs can be really, really valuable partners in this whole quest for peace and reconciliation. They bring this whole unique set of skills and perspectives, but I mean, we can't ignore the fact that even with the best intentions, there are still some potential pitfalls, right? We've talked about the risk of of empowering those extremist elements within the Serbian Orthodox Church. Are there other challenges that we need to be aware of?
That's a great question, and it leads us to some of the deeper ethical dilemmas that we really need to grapple with here.
Okay, this is where it gets really thought-provoking. So tell me more about those ethical dilemmas. What are some of the potential unintended consequences of trying to engage with with a religious community in a conflict zone?
I mean, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that your efforts don't accidentally legitimize or empower groups or individuals who are promoting like intolerance or violence. It's a tough spot to be in, because you want to support religious freedom, the right of people to practice their faith, but you also don't want to contribute to the very problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's like you're walking this tightrope, right? You want to build bridges with the Serbian Orthodox Church, but you also need to be really careful about like who you're actually engaging with and what messages you might be, amplifying.
Exactly, and it's not always clear, like who actually represents the quote unquote true voice of a religious community.
Right.
You can have these internal divisions, these competing factions, all these different interpretations of religious doctrine. It's so important to do your homework, to really understand the complexities, and to avoid making assumptions based on stereotypes or just oversimplifications.
Right. The author talks about this, this need for a really nuanced approach, one that recognizes that even within a religious community, you're going to have this whole spectrum of views, and not everyone supports those more extreme ideologies.
Right. It's about engaging with a diversity of voices, being willing to listen to those different perspectives, and avoiding that trap of just painting this whole group with a single brushstroke.
Yeah. And I imagine that this kind of, nuanced approach, it requires a really deep understanding of the local context, the historical grievances, the cultural sensitivities. It's not something you can just kind of, parachute in and figure out overnight.
It takes time, it takes patience, it takes a willingness to build those relationships. It's about earning trust, showing empathy, and showing that you're actually like genuinely committed to understanding their perspective, even if you don't agree with it all the time.
Right. The author seems to think that this this cultural engagement thing, while it is challenging, he seems to think that it's ultimately essential if we actually want to create a more peaceful and just world.
He really argues that ignoring or dismissing the role of religion in conflict zones, it's not only naive, it's potentially really dangerous. It can lead to policies and interventions that are just they're out of touch with the realities on the ground, and they can even backfire. They can actually make the problems you're trying to solve even worse.
So it's not about like imposing this secular worldview or trying to just erase religious differences. It's about understanding that religion is this powerful force in a lot of people's lives, and finding ways to kind of channel that force towards peace and reconciliation.
Right, and that's where those ideas of interfaith dialogue and religious literacy that we talked about earlier, that's where they become really important. It's about creating those spaces where people from different faiths can come together, share their stories, build those relationships, and find that common ground.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, and understanding that even with all our differences, we can still find ways to work together for the common good.
Absolutely.
Wow, this deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. I knew that the situation in Kosovo was complex, but I don't think I ever really fully grasped the depth of the religious dimension. And how much it really shapes the conflict.
It's a good reminder that peacebuilding, it's not just about political negotiations or economic development. It's about understanding the hearts and minds of the people who are involved. Their beliefs, their values, their deepest hopes.
Yeah, and it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in building a more peaceful and just world, whether it's through supporting organizations that are working on the ground, engaging in respectful dialogue with people from different backgrounds, or even just educating ourselves about the complexities of the world.
It's about embracing that richness and diversity of human experience, while also seeking out those common threads that really bind us together as a global community.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Kosovo. It's been a challenging journey, but ultimately I think a really hopeful one, and it's one that reminds us of the power of understanding, of empathy, and that constant pursuit of peace.